If I say the word Machiavellian to you, what's the very first image that pops into your head? Be honest.
Oh, it's almost always a caricature. Someone lurking in the shadows, probably wearing a cape, stroking a white cat, plotting something terrible. We use the word as a synonym for evil, for manipulation.
For just being a generally awful human being.
Exactly. The villain in every movie.
Right. But today, we're going to look at the source material that actually spawned that adjective. And we aren't just looking at the famous book, The Prince, by Niccolo Machiavelli. We have a whole stack of his writings here.
Yeah, including his historical narratives on Cesare Borgia and the life of the soldier Castruccio Castracani.
And honestly, when you dig into the stack, you find something much more complex and frankly, much more disturbing than just cartoon villainy.
Mechanics is the perfect word for it. Machiavelli wasn't writing a book on ethics or philosophy. He was writing a technical manual.
A how-to guide.
Think of it like a car repair guide, but for running a state. If your engine's smoking, you don't pray over it, you don't politely ask it to stop, you fix the gasket. Machiavelli is simply telling you how to fix the gasket of a broken state.
Regardless of how much grease or blood you get on your hands.
Right. The mission for this deep dive is pretty simple, but it's going to be hard to do. We are going to try to strip away the moral outrage. We aren't here to say if this is right or wrong, or if Machiavelli was a quote-unquote bad guy.
We just want to understand the mechanics of power as he saw them. And he wasn't writing this from an ivory tower either. I mean, the context here is just absolutely vital. He was basically writing a desperate job application, wasn't he?
Precisely. That is the lens you have to read this through. Machiavelli had been a high-ranking official in the Florentine Republic, but when the Medici family came back to power, he was purged.
Kicked out, right.
Kicked out of office, he was imprisoned, he was even tortured. He was exiled to his farm, suffering what he called malignity of fortune.
So the prince is him knocking on the door saying, please, please let me back in?
Exactly. He dedicates the book to Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici. He says, look, I don't have gold, I don't have horses, I don't have precious stones to give you, but I offer you the most valuable thing I own, my knowledge of the actions of great men.
I love that analogy he uses in the dedication. He apologizes for being a man of low and humble condition, discussing how to rule, but then he flips it.
It's a brilliant rhetorical move. He says that to paint a mountain, you have to stand in the plain. And to paint the plain,
you have to stand on the mountain.
Exactly. He's telling Lorenzo, you are on the summit. You can see the people clearly, but I am down here in the mud. I can see you. He's selling his vision.
So let's get into that vision. He starts by categorizing states. He mentions republics, but he basically says, I've written about those elsewhere. Today we're talking about principalities.
And he draws this hard line between hereditary states and new ones.
Hereditary is what we might call easy mode.
Totally. If your family has ruled for 100 years, the people are used to it, the structures are there. As long as you don't change the customs too much, and you aren't, completely insane, you'll probably stay in power.
But the new principality, that's where the trouble starts.
And he identifies this paradox that is just so insightful about human nature. He says people will willingly change masters, hoping for an improvement.
They'll open the gates for the new guy.
But they're deceiving themselves. Machiavelli argues that the new boss is inevitably worse than the old boss. It's not because the new guy is evil, it's just the mechanics of the situation.
How so?
To secure your power, you have to harm the very people who helped you. You have to quarter soldiers in their houses, you have to raise taxes to pay for the conquest.
So now you've got enemies in the people you overthrew, but you've also alienated the friends who opened the gates for you.
Because you can never give them as much as they expected. You're stuck. And this is where Machiavelli offers some of his most ruthless advice. Specifically, what to do if you conquer a place with a different language or culture.
He says the best thing is just to go live there.
Right. The absolute best thing. Like the Turk did in Greece. If you're on the ground, you see trouble starting. You can fix it while it's small. If you're away, you only hear about it when it's a full-blown revolution.
And by then it's too late.
Way too late. But if you can't live there, his plan B is fascinating. Send colonies.
This part seems like a very, very cold calculation to me. He says don't send a massive army to hold the town. That's expensive and everyone hates soldiers.
Instead, you take a little bit of land, kick a few people out, and you put your own loyal citizens there. It's brutal math. He argues that colonies are cheap. And sure, you offend the people whose land you took.
Yeah.
You've ruined them.
But he points out that those people are now poor and scattered.
They can't hurt you and everyone else. They stay quiet.
Because they're afraid if they speak up, their land gets taken next.
Which leads to that chilling quote, which I think is just the core of the Machiavellian mindset.
Men ought either to be well treated or crushed.
It's the logic of the feud. If you do a minor injury to someone, you insult them, fine them, whatever, they survive, they keep their resources, and they nurture that grudge. They want revenge.
But if you destroy them completely,
If you take everything, they can't take revenge. So the logic dictates that any injury you do to a man must be so severe that you don't need to fear his payback.
it's disturbing, but from a pure survival standpoint, it's efficient. He points to the Romans as masters of this.
The Romans practiced preventative medicine. Machiavelli uses this great medical analogy. Political trouble is like a hectic fever,
Oh, right. At the start, it's easy to cure but hard to detect.
and if you let it go, later on, it's easy to detect, but impossible to cure. So you have to treat it before you can even really see it. If the Romans saw a powerful neighbor rising, they crushed him immediately.
They didn't kick the can down the road.
No, because Machiavelli says you can never really avoid a war. You can only postpone it to the advantage of your enemy. If you wait, the other guy just gets stronger.
Okay, so you've secured the territory, you've crushed potential threats, now you need to defend it. And Machiavelli seems almost obsessed with the military side of things.
He basically says if you don't have good arms, you can't have good laws. He goes further. He says a prince should have no other thought but war,
Even in peacetime.
especially in peacetime. He should be out hunting constantly, not for fun, but to learn the terrain, where are the valleys, how steep are the mountains. Because if you don't know your own land, you can't defend it.
And he's got a real problem with how armies were put together back then. He puts troops into 3 buckets: mercenaries, auxiliaries, and your own arms.
And he has absolutely zero patience for mercenary.
He loathes them.
You have to remember, in his time, Italy was overrun by foreign powers, and the Italian city-states all relied on these contract soldiers, condottieri. Machiavelli calls them useless and dangerous, disunited, ambitious, undisciplined.
Because the incentives are all wrong, right? They get paid to fight, not necessarily to win.
They're only there for a paycheck. And that's not enough to make them want to die for you. He says they rob you in peace and they run away in war. He actually blames the entire ruin of Italy on this reliance on mercenaries.
But he says auxiliaries are even worse. That's when you call up a powerful neighbor and say, hey, bring your army and help me out.
That is just a no-win scenario. Think about it. If they lose, well, you're defeated. If they win,
You're their prisoner.
you're now their prisoner. You've just invited a lion into your house to catch a mouse. Once the mouse is gone, the lion is looking at you.
He uses the Bible story of David and Saul to illustrate this. I'd never thought of it this way, but it fits perfectly.
Right. Saul offers David his armor to fight Goliath. And David puts it on, but it's too heavy. It doesn't fit him. He can't move.
So he takes it off, uses his own sling and knife.
And Machiavelli's point is that other people's power, their armor, it either falls off you, weighs you down, or it restricts you. You must rely on your own citizens, your own subjects. That is the only safe path.
Okay, so we have the setup. Independent army, constant training, crushing enemies completely. Now let's get into the psychology of the prince himself, the virtue versus vice section. This is where he really breaks with tradition.
This is the turning point of Western political philosophy. Before Machiavelli, writers would tell princes to be just, generous, honest, merciful, all the good things.
The good Christian ruler.
Exactly. And Machiavelli looks at that and says, that is a fantasy. That is an imaginary republic. He argues that a man who tries to be good in a world where most men are not good, well, he will simply be ruined.
So a prince must learn how not to be good.
He has to. Let's unpack the generosity trap, because being generous sounds like a good thing. Any modern politician wants to be seen as generous. But Machiavelli does the economic math. To be known as liberal or generous, you have to spend a lot of money. You throw feasts, build statues, give gifts. Where does that money come from?
Taxes.
Exactly. You have to tax your people to pay for your reputation for generosity.
Yeah.
So eventually, the people hate you because you're taxing them to death, and you run out of money. You become poor and despised.
Whereas if you are miserly or mean,
You save money. You can defend the state without raising taxes. And eventually, the people see that you aren't taking their money from them, and they actually start to view you as generous because you aren't robbing them.
it's completely counterintuitive.
But he argues it's the only stable path.
Then there's the big one, the question everyone knows. Is it better to be loved or feared?
Ideally both. But since that's rare, He says it is much, much safer to be feared.
Why safer?
Because love is a bond of obligation. Men are selfish. They'll break that bond of love whenever it suits their own self-interest. But fear is maintained by the dread of punishment.
And that never fails.
That never fails. That sticks with you.
But there's a limit, right? He is very clear about this. You can be feared, but you must not be hated.
That is the crucial line. A ruler can survive being feared. He cannot survive being hated. Hatred leads to conspiracies and assassination. And how do you avoid hatred? It's simple.
Don't touch their property and don't touch their women.
He has that incredibly cynical line about this.
No, I know the one.
Men more quickly forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. You can kill a man's family, but if you take his inheritance, if you take his farm, he will never forgive you. Greed is more persistent than grief.
It's so dark, but he backs it up with history. He compares Hannibal and Scipio.
Right. Hannibal led this massive mixed army, different races, languages, and he never had a mutiny. Why? Because he was inhumanly cruel. His soldiers were terrified of him.
And Scipio?
Scipio was the nice guy, very lenient, very moral, and his armies rebelled against him in Spain. Machiavelli is saying that Scipio's virtue was actually a vice because it led to disorder. Hannibal's vice of cruelty created order.
This brings us to the famous metaphor of the fox and the lion.
The dual nature of the beast. The lion is strong. He can scare off wolves. But he gets caught in traps because he doesn't look down. The fox is weak, but he can spot the traps.
So a prince can't just be a lion.
He has to be both. He has to be a great pretender. He has to be a fox.
Which means lying.
Constantly. Machiavelli says if you keep your word when it harms you, you're just being a fool. Because no one else is keeping their word to you. He points to Pope Alexander VI, Caesar Borgia's father, and says he did nothing but deceive people his whole life, and he was wildly successful because of it.
Well, talking about great pretenders and success brings us perfectly to his son, Caesar Borgia, Duke Valentino. Machiavelli spends a lot of time on him. He's presented almost as the model new prince.
Borgia is the case study for ruthlessness applied effectively. The most famous example in the text is the Ramiro d'Orco incident. This is a masterclass in public relations through violence.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Borgia conquers the Romagna region. It's a mess robbery, feuds, total chaos. It's ungovernable. He needs to clean it up. So he hires a hitman, basically, Ramiro d'Orco. He appoints this cruel, efficient man as governor and gives him absolute power.
And Ramiro does the job.
He does. He restores order, but he uses brutal methods. Everyone is terrified. Now, Borgia knows that if he keeps Ramiro, the people will hate him for the cruelty, but he can't just fire him or he looks weak.
So what does he do?
He waits until the job is done. Then one morning, the people of Cesena wake up and go to the town piazza, and there's Ramiro d'Orco. He's been cut in two pieces. There's a block of wood and a bloody knife beside him.
That is incredibly theatrical.
He was calculated. Machiavelli says the people were at once satisfied and dismayed. Borgia took credit for the order showing he was strong, but detached himself from the cruelty by executing the executioner. He became the judge, not the oppressor.
We also have the story of the Sinigalia trap from the appendix. I mean, this makes out like a scene from The Godfather.
It really does. Borgia has these rival captains, the Orsini and the Vitelli families. They're plotting against him. Borgia realizes this, but he can't beat them all in open battle yet, so he plays the fox.
He pretends to forgive them.
He goes overboard. He offers them money, horses, treats them with respect. He calls them his fathers. He even sends his own French troops away so he looks less threatening. He just lulls them into this false sense of security.
And they buy it. They agree to meet him at Sinigalia.
They meet him. Borgia's all smiles, welcomes them, invites them into his quarters for a private conference, and as soon as the door closes, his men jump them. He has them strangled.
Just like that. Eliminates all his rivals in one afternoon.
And Machiavelli doesn't call this evil. He calls it magnificent. He calls it a masterclass in eliminating threats. He admires the technique.
But it's not just Borgia. We also have this biography of Castruccio Castracani. It reads like a superhero origin story.
Oh yeah, found abandoned in a vineyard, raised by a priest, but all he wants to do is fight. Castracani is interesting because he represents military genius. Machiavelli uses him to show how a prince acts on the battlefield.
There's the Battle of Serravalle. Castruccio is outnumbered by the Florentines, but he studies the terrain.
He seizes a castle overlooking a narrow pass the night before, right? So when the Florentines try to come up the hill, they're jammed in. Their numbers don't matter because they can't deploy. Castruccio hits them from the flank and just destroys them.
It just shows Machiavelli's belief that talent and strategy outweigh raw numbers.
But there's a twist at the end of the Castruccio story that I found really poignant. Castruccio conquers half of Tuscany. He's a legend. But then he dies of a fever after a battle. And on his deathbed, he talks to his heir.
This is where the tone shifts completely.
It does. Castruccio has spent his life conquering, but on his deathbed, he regrets his ambition. He says, I should have been content with a smaller, secure state. He realizes he's leaving his successor with too many enemies and not enough stability.
It seems to almost contradict the prince. I mean, the prince is all about conquer, expand, crush. But Castruccio's final lesson is, I tried to grab too much, and now it might all fall apart.
It highlights the role of fortune. That's the final piece of the puzzle. Machiavelli sees fortune as a river. You can't stop a flood when it's happening. But in quiet times, you can build dikes and canals. You can prepare.
Castruccio prepared for war, but he couldn't prepare for the fever.
Exactly. And he has that other metaphor for fortune, which is controversial today.
Yeah, he personifies fortune as a woman.
He does. And he says she favors the young and the bold, that she lets herself be commanded by those who are audacious, not those who are cautious. It's a call to action. You can't just wait for good luck. You have to grab it. You have to force the issue.
Which leads to the final chapter of The Prince. After all this talk of cold, hard tactics, stranglings, executions, lies, the ending is surprisingly emotional.
It's a patriotic plea. He looks at Italy, which at the time was divided, occupied by the French, the Spanish, the Germans, and he says it's enslaved, beaten, without life.
And he tells the Medici, this is your moment.
He believes that if they use these ruthless methods, they can liberate Italy. He's trying to sell a vision. He's saying, I have given you the toolkit. It's bloody, it's scary, and it requires you to be a fox and a lion. But if you use it, you can save the country.
He says the barbarian dominion stinks to everyone.
He even suggests a new type of infantry that can resist cavalry to make it happen. He ends on this note of hope, which is just so strange for such a cynical book.
So, when we step back and look at this stack of material, the prince, the histories, the biographies, what is the real takeaway?
I think the core tension is adaptability. Machiavelli says a prince must change as the winds of fortune dictate. If the times demand caution, be cautious. If they demand brutality, be brutal.
The mistake men make is they have one mode.
Exactly. They're always cautious or always aggressive. And when the times change, they're ruined because they can't change with them.
And I can't help but think about that deathbed confession of Castruccio again. He was the perfect Machiavellian hero. He deceived, he conquered, he was a fox and a lion. And in the end, he felt like he'd built a house of cards.
It raises the ultimate question of power, right? Machiavelli teaches you how to get it and how to keep it. But he doesn't necessarily promise that it will make you happy or that it will last forever. The mechanics work, but the machine might still consume you.
That is a lot to think about. Next time you see a politician pivoting on an issue or a CEO making a ruthless cut, don't just think they're evil. Look for the fox and the lion. They might just be reading from the manual. Thanks for diving in with us.
Pleasure as always.